Today we're analyzing a bunch of cards that Commander players simply cannot agree upon.
I'm Mia, and I mediate blood feuds online.
I'm BZ. I don't have a fact, but I'll owe you one later. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom, the place you can go to buy Magic the Gathering. You can buy the whole thing on Card Kingdom. You just got to make sure you use the link in our description so that they know that we told you to go buy Magic the Gathering.
Every Magic the Gathering, sealed, singles, accessories, all of it, every single card you could ever want is on Card Kingdom. If you use our link, we would appreciate you a ton. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds,
you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order. That is lowercase
Nerds.
including custom sleeves on their sleeve crafter. Gorgeous sleeves. We love them.
I feel like you're the lowercase nerds and I'm the uppercase nerds.
You are louder than me.
I just meant height.
Oh, okay.
I was going for a height thing there. We also sponsored by Moxfield, but not yet. Be patient. We're also sponsored by ourselves. You can go to Patreon and check out exclusive things like we have podcasts and some gameplay that we have on Spell Table with a bunch of our other creator buddies and just information that we can't get out all on the YouTube channel. It is there.
One more sponsor. We are sponsored by Showcase Deck Boxes, the best place to get deck boxes. You can find your commander very, very easily with them because of this special window that lets you see gorgeous, gorgeous art like our altars here of Carador and Kalia. They are super, super vibrant and they are very durable. This has an entire deck box in it, and it is not coming out due to super strong magnets. If you want to check it out, go to the website in the description box and tell them we sent you.
So today we're looking at a handful of very tricky cards. I want to call them controversial, but they're not controversial in the way that like Armageddon is controversial. This is like players can't agree if these cards are even good. A lot of them see a decent chunk of play. Some of them see a ton of play, but I feel like the community is very split. So we're going to be going over these cards, talking about pros, talking about cons, and then giving you where we each stand on them, which may be different from like one another between us two. But I think these are all very interesting discussions, and we haven't really gotten into the meat of a lot of these cards yet. The first one, let's just get into it. Temple of the False God. It is a land. It taps for colorless, but only if you have 5 or more lands. This is probably the poster child for card that sees a lot of play. No one is even sure if it is actually a good card.
I mean, there are a lot of pros and a lot of cons with it. I think one of the reasons that it's seen so much play is because it's included in like every pre-con. I feel like it's one of those cards where sometimes people don't edit their mana bases until last in their precons and they want to shove it in with a bunch of cool stuff or new cards that they got, and then their land base just kind of falls to the wayside a little bit, and then this is one of the cards that sticks around and it sees a ton of play, whether that be because it stays in the Moxfield lists or because people don't actively take it out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's probably a little bit inflated, this one specifically, because it shows up a lot in the precons, and it showed up a lot in the past ones. So maybe on EDH Rec, this number is a little bit higher than it actually is. I wonder how much play this would see if it was never reprinted in a precon and it was just a card from, oh God, what is it, from like Invasion or something? Like some of those old sets, kind of like the Crusty border. I am unsure of how much play it would see, but it does have upsides. When you draw this card in the middle or the late game, it's just a straight up Ancient Tomb, but you don't have to take damage. It's just a straight up free mana. And I think that's a little bit understated sometimes, maybe even on this channel previously. I think when you draw Temple of the False God and you play it in the later turns, that's pretty sick. Some people like to say that, you know, when you draw it, it's like, well, I don't really need that mana because it's turn 7. It's like, I don't know. That's pretty nuts that a land can just give you an extra mana. I think it's huge in general. It adds up over time. And I think it is a very real upside. But it's also a very real downside to draw this card in your opening hand and have it be just more useless than a sack of potatoes.
I mean, the mana definitely counts. You know, I'm never mad to draw Soul Ring, even if it's like turn 7 or 8, unless I'm about to win that turn. Another pro for it is that it is cheap because it was reprinted in 10 billion precons, every one actually. Not really, but because it was reprinted so much, it's so cheap that you can throw it into any deck, and if you can hit those consistent turn 5, you know, land drops and stuff, or if your games go that long, it can be a consistent way to get 2 mana on 1 land.
Yeah, and so one of my other questions that I had to do some digging on was like, how often does this actually work? Because I don't play this card. I don't have any math handy on whether this works or not. So I went and found some. There was an MTG Goldfish video with Frank Karsten featuring some Frank Karsten math from a while ago, and it showed that turn 5 in a Mardu precon, the odds of Temple of the False God working on turn 5 in a Mardu precon with 36 lands was about 75%, maybe a little bit lower than that. And then the odds of it working on turn 5 in a deck with 42 lands, where they up the land count, is about 85%. And this math, it's interesting. I thought it would be lower, but at the same time, I'm trying to think of other Magic cards that literally do nothing 25% of the time that I would play.
I think there are a few of those. I mean, there are cards that I play that are dead more than 25% of the time. For instance, like big win cons. Like, I can't cast Craterhoof turns 1 through 6 usually. I'm not casting Rise of the Dark Realms like, you know, turns 1 through 8 sometimes even. You know, I feel like there are certain cards that we play because they're like our finishers, right? And then there are certain cards where I don't know. I guess I can play it turn 1 or 2 like it's great turn 1 or 2 like Rampant Growth, but in turn 9, 10, 11 if the games go that long, I kind of don't want it. You know, I feel like every card is dead at least some percentage of the time, except for like free counter spells and, you know, free interaction.
That's a fair point, but I noticed you don't play Temple of the False God.
I don't play Temple of the False God. I feel like hitting land drops is crucial, and making sure all my lands are turned on is such a big portion of the game to me. I feel like I don't want tap lands most of the time too, and I try to limit those unless I have ways to keep them untapped, like spelunking with Uro and that sort. Or if I can hit extra land drops in a certain turn, I will play more lands that are not able to be tapped for mana immediately. But because I need my early turn plays, and I think that a lot of games hinge on early turn plays, I don't think I can really afford to be running Temple of the False God, even in budget decks.
Yeah, I think more games are not decided in the first 5 turns, but more games are essentially won or lost in the first 5 turns by you having this really sick curve out, or smoothing out your draws, or fixing and finding what you need. And then this just being a brick and forcing you to like work around it by either, you know, playing more lands in your deck, or, you know, avoiding playing it and trying to do other things to get other lands in your hand. I think, you know, in a deck with 1 million lands in it, this is probably not the worst. I think you can also offset this with Urborg and Yavimaya no matter what colors you play. I mean, if you're not green or black, you probably don't want them, but you still could. And it would offset them some percentage of the time. So that percentage that it's turned on in the decks that have, you know, 40 something lands, probably maybe even higher than 85%. So, you know, I feel like this, you know, experience of like researching Temple of the False God, I feel like maybe I've been a little low on it. So if I would have played it in 0 out of 10 decks before, I think maybe it's worth playing in 1 out of 10.
Maybe I'll try it in Uro or something because I can hit land drops very consistently there. I also feel that a lot of my decks are Mardu or Orzhov, or, you know, kind of floating around in the non-extra land drop range. So a lot of my ramp is artifact based. So, and I also feel like a lot of the spells that I like to cast, at least, have a lot of pips in them. So I think that the 2 colorless are usually kind of a hindrance. There's a reason that even though I can't, like in the non-budget decks, I can play Ancient Tomb, it's not always an option. Like, for instance, with Atraxa, I don't really want to be playing Ancient Tomb in Atraxa because I need so many pips in there. So I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, sometimes I don't think Temple of the False God is always the place I want to be either.
I mean, I don't think Temple of the False God goes in most of your decks because they're all 3 colors.
Yeah.
You don't put colorless lands in 3 color decks that often. So
I mean,
you probably
we're
talking like 1 and 2 colors mostly. So in 1 and 2 color decks, you know, maybe 1 in 15, you might want this. You need a high land count, and you maybe need some other stuff to offset it. But yeah, let us know where you fall on Temple of the False God. Let us know where you fall on all 15 of these cards, because they're very divisive. Some people swear by them, and some people say they're trash.
I think so too. I mean, I could see trying it, but because I like to play so many colors in my decks, I don't think it'll be a staple necessarily. The next one is Feed the Swarm. 1 in black for a sorcery. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. This is a really great one because it is pretty cheap. It's only 1 in a black, and it also has removal outside your color pie. Usually black can't remove enchantments, so this is one of the only ways to consistently do it. Hence why it's added into a lot of black decks, or especially mono black.
Yeah, this is one of the most played black cards, period. And I feel like a lot of people are definitely on the Feed the Swarm train. And then there's some people, though, that are just like, why would I play Feed the Swarm? You know, they wouldn't touch it with like a 10-foot pole. And this video is more about cards that people cannot disagree on. It's not necessarily that we disagree with the community as a whole. We're just finding cards that people disagree on, and then we're going to give you our take, whatever that happens to be. Feed the Swarm, yeah, like you said, I think the biggest draw to it, honestly, maybe the only draw to it, is that it answers things that black as a color typically cannot answer. The cons, the drawback, what you have to give up is you're playing a subpar spell. 2 mana, sorcery speed, destroy a creature or enchantment, and you lose life, so it scales with how big the thing is. That's like terrible as a removal spell. But the thing that you get from it is that you can answer something that you wouldn't be able to answer.
I think that personally, I play this every once in a while. I don't think it's unplayable, not by far. And I think it's one of the reasons is because of that rate of 1 in a black. Sorcery speed, giving up the speed is a little bit tough for me because I do like all of my interaction at instant speed, especially when we're spoiled for things like swords that is cheaper than this. And, so you're basically, for me, this just crosses out the destroy target creature. This just says destroy target enchantment opponent controls. You lose life equal to the permanent's mana value. If I'm playing anything with green, if I'm playing anything with blue, I will not be running this. But if I'm running mono black, there's a chance I might be running this.
That's the thing I would note is never touch this card if you're in green or white. You also don't play it in blue.
I mean, I could be running counter spells at that point.
Okay, yeah. So just don't, and I guess bounce permanent things. So just, at least for us, if you're in Bant, you don't really need this. This is more like a mono black card or a red black card because neither of those colors typically can answer enchantments. Honestly, where I stand on this card is I don't play it almost ever. I don't think it's worth it. And what I'm waiting for is a more playable version of this card to come out. So I never play Feed the Swarm, but the card that's making this very interesting now that just came out in Duskmourn is Withering Torment. And I'm wondering, is that card better or worse than Feed the Swarm? This is 2 in a black for an instant. Destroy target creature or enchantment. You lose 2 life. Where do you feel like this is going to fall?
I think Withering Torment is worse than this. I don't want to be keeping up the mana. I think if Withering Torment had Convoke, it would be fine. But usually I don't care about how much life I lose off of this. I would rather destroy Omniscience and take 7 for 2 mana than kind of at sorcery speed, then hold up 3 mana and maybe destroy an enchantment and take 5 less life. At that point, I think 5 life is kind of negligible. And I think if you say, especially in like a mono black deck, I can destroy the thing, but like, can the rest of you not attack me for a turn? If it's hurting other people, I feel like you can strike a deal where you can kind of negate that 5 life loss or whatever the detriment of life loss you have to remove the thing, and kind of get other people to attack the person with the big threat at that point.
It's funny because I think I'm on the exact opposite train as you. I think Withering Torment is better than Feed the Swarm, and I'm probably never going to play Feed the Swarm really, but I might slot Withering Torment into a few decks. I'm not someone who needs to have like an answer to every permanent. Like, I'm okay if I'm a mono black deck with being unable to answer some enchantments. That's just because I can't answer them doesn't mean they're going to kill me, doesn't mean that someone else isn't going to answer them. I understand wanting to feel secure and having that security to potentially answer it, but half the time you play Feed the Swarm, it's not going to go in an enchantment anyway because you're under some pressure from just a more powerful creature or a creature that hit the field early that just needs to go, and Feed the Swarm's your only removal spell. So maybe I'll play Withering Torment because I think the instant speed is a pretty huge upgrade, and in the late game, there isn't that downside of like, I can't cast Feed the Swarm on Grave Titan because I'll die. So I think I might play Withering Torment. I don't know. Ultimately, I think the question is, do you feel like, are you comfortable with potentially not being able to answer a permanent?
I mean, I think the deal is, I don't ever remember using Feed the Swarm on a creature in the last 3 to 5 years. I just don't use it for that. I negate that clause out of my head unless I'm about to die to the creature.
Isn't it worth like the versatility?
It's worth the versatility, but I'm running enough in my mono black or black white decks, or just red black or whatever. I run enough removal spells to the point where I can ignore that.
Okay, I mean, this could be a whole other video.
So at that point, it just saves me a mana, and I just have to play it on my turn, so I'd rather save the mana and keep up something else.
Let us know your thoughts on Feed the Swarm versus, what's that other card? Withering Torment. Let us know in the comments there. We're going to go to the next one. Classic. This is a classic conundrum. Arcane Denial. Is it trash, or is it actually pretty good? It's 1 in a blue for an instant. Counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. This card is a card that I personally think is a little bit better than Counterspell, but a lot of people are like, oh my god, this card is so stinky. Get it away from me.
I think that the pros here is that you get your card refunded back immediately, and it's pretty easy to cast. Unlike Counterspell, you don't need 2 blue pips. It is 1 and a blue, so you can slot it in decks that are not a majority blue, which makes it very appealing to a lot of people. However, the con is that your opponent does draw 2 cards, which can be a little bit rough because obviously you don't want to be giving your opponents cards if you're not in like group hug or you can't profit off of that.
Yeah, so here's where I fall on the Arcane Denial math. Chris, our editor, is going to throw up a little graphic, something to help you understand while I read off just numbers. So when you counterspell a spell, doesn't matter what spell it is, you and the player involved in that exchange are down a card, and the other 2 players are even. They have not spent or done anything. So they're you could say they're up a card, but I think it's easier to say that you and the person that you countered are down a card. The other 2 people are neutral. When you Arcane Denial, the other 2 players obviously still neutral. They're not involved. I get my card back, so I'm actually also neutral. And the other player is down a card because I countered, up 1 card, and then up a second card, which evens out to being only up 1 card. So if you look at the table, after Counterspell, 2 people are down a card. But if you look at the table after Arcane Denial, 1 person is up a card. So I think in terms of that math of like card parity, I think I favor Arcane Denial personally.
I have tried it, and I was really down on it when I first started the channel. You can see that in like the video that we might put right here. But overall, I think that I am coming around to it a little bit. I first tried it in my Wheels deck, my Jekyll Hyde deck, if you guys know about that. And I wanted to profit off people drawing cards, so it was an easy include because people drawing cards would deal damage to them or make them have unsavory effects. But I've been slowly putting it into other decks too. I think one of the reasons is that they don't get the cards immediately. So if they draw some other life-ending threat or whatever, they still have to wait an entire turn cycle to go around. And the second reason that I've been putting in a lot more is because of the fact that it's easier to cast with colors. I like to play a lot of colors, as I mentioned earlier, and so I've been slotting it in due to cheap interaction and because 2 blue pips are pretty hard for me. I feel like this kind of has the tinge of an offer you can't refuse. Some people, I mean, most people really like it, but I remember some people in the beginning were like, well, I don't want to give my opponent 2 treasures because even if I'm countering their spell. But overall, I think that it's still worth it in the end, even if you are giving them that advantage, because I usually don't think that the cards that they're going to draw are better than whatever you're using this to cast on. But then again, don't cast this. This is not like an end-all, be-all counterspell like Counterspell. Don't cast it on things that you would like think they can draw better than. Like, I wouldn't cast this on like Explosive Vegetation, for instance.
Yeah, unless, some kind of critical point in the game. I mean, use it carefully, I guess, but the thing that I really value is just getting my own card back. I'm happy to give out, the 1 card sort of refunds it. If it was just you and that player each draw a card, it would be like a wash kind of, and I would be very happy with that. I just want my card back. You get an extra card off of it. You're going to be up a card after this. Great. Can we all just be happy about it? I am so happy to answer a critical threat, not have to spend a bunch of pips and get my card back on it.
I mean, I think also there is a point of politicalness. When I get my spell countered with Arcane Denial, if I wasn't going to win on that turn, I feel a little bit less bad about it because I'm getting 2 cards back. Maybe you can spin it in like a little bit of a political sense because it's like, okay, well, they won't be as sad about it or they might not come after you as hard. I don't know. I just feel a little bit less bad when I am up a card at the end of that.
Yeah, I never feel bad about it, which, maybe is another bonus for Arcane Denial. It's like, maybe I should feel bad about it. I just got my spell countered. I would so much rather have that spell than 2 random cards, but here I am going, ooh, wow.
More cards? This is awesome.
Okay, next up is another land, but it's actually like 12 different lands. These are the bounce lands. We'll just use the most popular one as an example. It's Simic Growth Chamber. It's a land that enters tapped. And when Simic Growth Chamber enters, return a land you control to its owner's hand. And it taps for green and a blue, so 2 mana.
The pros on this are you can effectively draw a card because you're going to be putting your land back into your hand and you're getting like the same amount of mana, though it comes in tapped. You can also have bounce MGFCs or things that come in where you can get those ETB triggers again. So if you have anything very important on that, you can be playing them again the next turn, or if you get additional land drops, you can be getting those effects. And if you have things like Spelunking, as I mentioned earlier, those can help you get that mana immediately.
Yep, anything that untaps this land now is like twice as good, even like Voyaging Satyr. Now if you got all these cards in the deck, these types of things just go off with it. Amulet of Vigor, like you said, the untappers that just make it enter untapped, and now you can maybe bounce it back to the hand and start doing other things like rituals. There's definitely upside, and I think the biggest one, even if you just throw this card in a random deck, the biggest upside you're going to see every game is that if you draw this in your opening hand and you have 2 lands and a Simic Growth Chamber, it's basically like you drew a card, because now you're going to have 4 mana in only those 3 lands, and it's like a whole extra land. So there's definitely a real upside to it, but there are cons. They enter tapped. A lot of people are just out. As soon as you see like land enters tapped, the power level they're playing at, they think that's not really for me, get it out of here. And it's also vulnerable because it is essentially 2 land drops tied up in one. So if I blow up your Simic Growth Chamber with a Generous Gift, you're kind of screwed if we're in the early game.
Yeah, I have been hurt by that before, like a Terastodon, just getting my land nuked just because it's like, well, there's no better lands out. Why not get the one that taps for 2? I feel like I've come around on bounce lands a little bit. I think that with the addition of the new MDFCs, I am higher on them. I have bounced Sink into Stupor multiple times back to my hand just to play it again, and it's very obnoxious, and it's very, very good. But overall, I think also that the fact that it enters tapped is very rough in decks that can't really utilize that. I think that it is nice that it doesn't say you have to return an untapped land to your hand, because you can kind of cheese it out, you know, just play it as your 3rd land drop, play a 2-drop, bounce something to your hand. That's pretty good, but I don't really want to be playing this in my high-power decks, even if it's only 2 colors. I still don't think that the tempo is really worth it for me.
Yeah, I feel like I was way too hard on these in past videos. Like we're talking like 5 years ago. I was probably way too hard on these. I have been playing them a little bit in budget decks if I have synergy with MDFCs or untappers, and they've honestly been pretty good. I've never had one destroyed, although I will add to that little thing that those are in budget games, so maybe land destruction is a little bit less prevalent, as I have less room to put Strip Mine in my mana base if I'm playing a $50 deck. But in those budget games, I have really not had a problem with it dying, and I've had, I would say, reasonable success with it. So a bounce lands, to me, if you've got the synergy, I would try it out. And if you've got the ways to make them enter untapped, could be very, very strong landfall things. Don't just blanket avoid them. That's a little silly. But that's also, there's context to everything.
Yeah, I think another pro is the fact that these also are reprinted in a lot of precons, so they are pretty cheap. And I think that if you were to put them in your deck, I mean, I would play these any day over things that just enter tapped, like just like the campuses, or
right, like
or
random
artifact lands in non-artifact decks, or just the ones that just
lands.
like gain. Yeah, I think that these are better than those by a mile. But overall, I think that if I'm not playing budget, I don't want to be playing these for the most part, because then I can just kind of turbo out my game plan a little bit faster.
Yeah, because if you're not landfall, when you fall out of budget and you can, you're throwing $800 at a deck or whatever, then it's just like, I don't want to tap land. And if I don't have synergy, just not play it. But next up, we're going to go to one of the most polarizing cards maybe ever, but in a good way. Ink Shield. 3 white-black for an instant. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to you this turn. For each 1 damage prevented this way, you get a 2/1. White and black Inkling creature token with flying. I say it in a good way because this is, I think, some of the best card design, because I think it is ultimately a card that is not that strong, but that is played a ton and people love it, and it's super hyped, and it creates these huge, ridiculous game states and blowouts and Uno reverses. So obviously the pros of Ink Shield is huge. It just has a huge impact on the game. Sometimes, certainly when you notice it, it has a huge impact on the game.
I mean, it has very high highs and very low lows, because the cons are it costs a lot of mana, and it can also backfire. I mean, if people are swinging at you for 2, or it's non-combat damage that you're dying from, this is a 5 mana do nothing in your hand, and that can be very disheartening to have. Yep. I think the key for this card is you need to know your limit. What is the minimum amount of combat damage that you will cast this for 5 mana? For me, that's pretty high, so I don't want to be playing this. But if you're willing to cast this for like 6 damage or something and get, 6 2/1s, and you think that is worth it in your metas or your game plans, then this is probably more playable than for your game plan. Or if you have players in your pods that swing out regularly for 30 something damage, then this is probably way more playable for you. But I know in our pods, if we keep up 5 mana in Orzhov colors, and we will probably suspect that it's Ink Shield or some sort of like kind of fog effect, and we will try and send things out in like little bursts of 4 or 6, try and deal non-combat damage, things like that, because we're pretty suspicious of keeping up all that mana and not playing anything with it.
Yeah, it's tricky because you have to determine, like the board state has to be so obvious that you have to know that you're going to leave up 5 mana, and then they also have to not, sniff anything out. Because if somebody is like 6 cards in hand, draws a card, plays a signet, and then passes, I'm like, all right, what's up? What's going on? Do you want to talk about something? What is it? What's wrong? Why didn't you play any spells on your turn? So I'm definitely like, the alarm bells go off a little bit. I think it is pretty predictable. But I think the problem is that if the board state's not obviously requiring an Ink Shield for you to survive, then you can't hold it up. Because I'm not just going to hold up Ink Shield every single time I have 5 mana on the off chance that somebody does something crazy. So the turns where you tap out, sometimes they do something crazy, and then you just die, because how could you have known?
I also think that this is worded a little bit interesting because it says, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you. For each 1 damage prevented this way. So that doesn't it's not a full fog, right? If you block, you can't block with your creatures and then play Ink Shield and then get all the Inklings. You have to say, okay, let it all go to my face before damage, put it in, and then get all the Inklings. If someone counters that, you're just dead.
Yeah, I think you probably would play Ink Shield before blockers in that case, because then if they countered it, you could just block. But I don't know. This card, I know there's a ton of pros. I think it's a great card. I don't think that Ink Shield is a bad Magic card. I think it's done perfect. It's done like the perfect Magic card. It's a card that's not offensive and not unfun and doesn't break anything, but it's super fun to play with. It's just not for us in terms of like, would I add Ink Shield to a deck looking to upgrade it? Probably not.
I mean, it's a very swingy card, and that creates fun, memorable games. And if your play group can really handle that, then I think you should really go for it. But I think in terms of power, if you are trying to get your deck to win as fast as possible, if you want the most optimal interaction, you're usually going for cheap interaction and for things that are a little bit more proactive, and Ink Shield doesn't really fall for that. But the next card we have is Vidalcan Orrery, 4 mana for an artifact. You can cast spells as though they had flash. This cheats timing restrictions, and people really like it for that. You can put it in any single deck because it is colorless, and just being able to be a little bit sneaky is fun.
This is a really funny one. This is a card that has been very divisive for like years, and maybe that's died down a little bit lately, but what started it was the Command Zone, especially Josh Lee Cly was like hyping this card up. And he was like, this card's crazy. I can't lose when I have this card. I always get to, cast all my spells at the perfect time. And a lot of people were like, oh, I totally agree with you. And then some people were like, oh, you've lost your mind. And it was so funny to watch people just like, wait, is this card good? Or is it just good for Josh Lee Cly? Like, I don't understand. Is it just that he can leverage it better with his specific decks and his play group? Or am I supposed to be playing this card? And nobody can figure it out. And I think where I've personally settled on it is that I don't really play this card.
I don't play this card either. I always feel that if I have 4 mana, I'd rather be doing something else than giving all my stuff flash.
Yeah, 4 mana is a decent chunk to play at sorcery speed for honestly no effect. You don't get anything right away. If you're passing the turn and you've got some mana left, you are going to get things. But like if you play it on turn 4, you don't get anything with it. I think it's tricky. It's not a card that really has synergy, so it's hard to say when a deck really, really wants it and when a deck really doesn't want it. The other thing, too, is like all of my spells nowadays, maybe this wasn't true 6 years ago, but all my removal spells now are instants. Most of them are instants. And like, you do get the chance to like instant speed board wipe, which could be cool, because then you can go, who are you attacking at? And I trust instant speed Wrath of God much more than I trust Ink Shield.
I think that if I were playing something that were really, I could make a lot of colorless mana very quickly, and I wanted just like end step flash in Eldrazi or something. If I was playing like a very sneaky Eldrazi deck, maybe I'd try and do something like that. But I feel like if I were to build an Eldrazi deck right now, I'd want something very stompy, powerful, big hits, just like, you are dead if you don't wipe me right now. And I feel like I don't have the room for this. If I want to play a sneaky deck, I'm playing Demir, and I have things built in that have flash already, and I don't need to add another piece of adding flash when I'm playing a ton of instants, I'm playing a ton of flash creatures. I'm, maybe even just like Leyline at that point, because it might come in down for free, and that's already just a better portion of it, right?
Another thing that can often offset giving your spells flash in the first place is giving your creatures haste. So some decks would rather just do that, and then like instead of having to flash in an Eldrazi, they just play it as haste. It's kind of the same thing, and then they just beat in with it right away. That's the other card that I think is an interesting comparison, is Leyline of Anticipation. If you are a blue deck that wants Vidalcan Orrery, obviously you just want Leyline first. It's basically strictly better. It has the chance of just being free, and that's huge, and you can just take your whole game with now instant speed everything. But I don't know. Sometimes I also feel like blue decks are the decks that want this the least, where if all your stuff is instants and you're holding up a bunch of counter magic, do you really need your creatures to also have flash? It's definitely deck dependent, but some decks don't. I could maybe see this in like a Beladros Witherbloom,
Maybe.
where now you can really utilize his specific ability to pay 10 life and do weird stuff on everybody's turn, gaining that life back. That could be huge.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you would need something where you usually can't do the things that you want to at instant speed, but at the same point, you also need to have the extra mana to be able to cast this. And I think that is such a niche intersection that usually decks don't want this, or like the average deck doesn't want this, because it can go in any deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So next up, what do we got? We got a tutor, actually.
Next one is Diabolic Tutor. 2 black for a sorcery. Search your library for any card. Put that card into your hand and then shuffle. I mean, this is an unconditional tutor. This is Demonic Tutor if you wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is one of the worst tutors in terms of like how much mana you have to pay. There really isn't any tutors past like 5 mana. That's just not a thing, because at that point, what are you doing? But I think the question is a bad tutor, in air quotes, still good? Is it worth spending 4 mana to get my best card? And I think a lot of that depends on how good your best card really is and how much access do you have to other tutors. Let's, at least for this card, assume that we have access to almost no other tutors that are not either like 50 cents or 4 mana.
Yeah, I think that the price of this really plays into it, because Demonic Tutor is what, like $50 or something? Vampiric Tutor is what, like $30? Those are all very expensive if you're trying to build on a budget, or you just don't have access to that. I can understand why you'd want this. And I know there's other cards that kind of fall into this, like Mastermind's Acquisition and that sort, just like the high mana tutors. And this is played a fair amount. I think the question that I really need to ask is, how long are my games going? Is turn 2 for Demonic Tutor, because that is good no matter what, just as equal to early game as turn 4 Diabolic Tutor? If that's the case for me, and my games are going 15 turns, this still might be good. Who knows?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think if your best card is just like a big creature, forget it. I think if your best card is some kind of unstoppable overrun or Rise of the Dark Realms, assuming your deck can do the thing of putting stuff in the graveyard, then I think I'm still a little iffy. But the question you have to ask is my deck so dependent on the card that I would tutor for in the best case scenario that I would be willing to tack 4 extra mana on it? Let's say Rise of the Dark Realms, because I can't think of anything else. That card is 9 mana. Would you pay 13 mana over 2 turns for that? A lot of times, it's not a great deal. And then the problem, I think, comes from when you have to Diabolic Tutor for something other than your baby, your win con, your slam dunk. Because if I'm really far behind, now my board wipe costs 8 mana, or now my Swords to Plowshares costs 5 mana. And instead of the Demonic Tutor of 3 mana, I'll take it for a Swords, or, 7 mana, 6 mana for a wipe, I'll take it. It's at least castable. But this could be the difference easily between being able to cast that answer that you have in your deck versus not.
I think 4 mana is a lot, and I also think that if I would rather take the chance of drawing more cards and putting more card draw in my deck and more consistent card draw and not getting the exact card I need but getting more cards overall than putting this into my deck for 4 mana and then getting 1 card that I need that I still might have to wait to cast if it's a big overrun or whatever, because I think I'd rather have 4 random cards over 1 specific card if I'm playing like Knight's Whisper and I'm playing the other.
I mean, you could play like Minions Murmurs and draw a card for each creature you have for the same mana value as this. You could do a couple other things. Ambition's cost is like 3 in a black. Sorcery, draw 3, lose 3. You could try something like that. Another tutor that I've always questioned, and I think maybe it's better than Diabolic Tutor, is I think it's called like Razaketh's second right. It's 3 black for the same card, but it's cycling for black. So if I maybe that's a card where I go, this is going to be the card that tutors for my absolute slam dunk win con in my budget deck. And if I'm in any other situation where I can't get that card or I can't afford it, I'll just cycle it and get rid of it. So maybe that's maybe a card I'd recommend over Diabolic Tutor. I don't know how you feel about it.
I just don't think that Diabolic Tutor is where I want to be, because in my ideal scenario, I don't let games go more than 8 turns, and by turn 4 that's mid-game for me. That's about exactly half the point or more of my game. So I don't really want to be tutoring at that point, because at that point I should have at least some sort of my like assembly kind of already done, right?
But how do you feel about Razakat's second right?
I think that 5 mana is a lot to tutor, and unless I have cycling synergies, I don't want to be playing it.
So if you had some kind of discard synergy, maybe?
Yeah, or something where it's like I can like bounce stuff from my graveyard to my hand or something like that, you know? Maybe I can bounce Ewit a bunch of times and keep getting stuff. Who knows, really? But I still don't really see myself playing it. I would rather just play straight up card draw.
Yeah, I think card draw is probably better in most cases. Next up, we're going to move to another land, another controversial land, Maze of Ith. This is a land. It does not tap for mana. It taps to untap target attacking creature. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. So this is not a land in the sense that it's going to ramp you or do anything for your mana, but it is a spell type effect. A lot of people have recommended don't play Maze of Ith as a land. Pretend it's a spell, and if you're going to play 36 in your lands in your deck, play Maze of Ith as your 37th land so that your mana isn't interrupted. That's a whole interesting like piece to talk about by itself, but in general, like, this is definitely a political tool that has good onboard value, but I just haven't felt like I want to cut something for it. I don't know, it's tricky.
I don't really ever think there's one creature where I'm so afraid of it hitting me or attacking me so consistently that I need this in my deck. I think that if your playgroup has a lot of Voltron decks running around, this might be a really good place for it, but Voltron isn't really something that we see as a strategy too often, whether we're playing against random people at conventions or we're playing with our friend groups casually. And because of that, I don't really want to put Maze of Ith in. I don't want a land that can't tap for mana. I just feel like it slows me down a little too much. And even as a spell in my deck, as the spell slot, as people suggest, I don't want a spell that is, I don't know, just out there too, because it's not like it's instant speed to the point where it's like I can just kind of play it and tap it if something big is swinging at me. It has to be face up knowledge at that point.
I think I've had very good success with this card in the form of Thematic Compass. That is another card that kind of doesn't do anything until you hit 7 lands, and I think Maze of Ith is one of those cards like Temple of the False God. Like, you just can't play this as one of your first 5 land drops and expect it to do literally anything, because there's just not going to be punches thrown around. I think this does have a lot of value though after that. And so in the games where I've at least played Thematic Compass, it does a little bit extra. It helps you hit land drops, but does have a little bit of a mana cost associated with. But being able to go, if you attack me, I'm just going to untap it and you're going to waste your time, that deters people hardcore, and it actually sends them veering elsewhere. So I don't think it's like, do I want an answer to something? It's like, do I want the political value of pressuring people into attacking each other or leaving me alone?
Maybe. I feel like I'm the type of person who would like make them use it, because it's not like if I attack them, yeah, I guess it is a wasted attack, but also it's not like I can't have that creature as a blocker at that point. And then if Maze of Ith is tapped and they're not going right after me, then there's a chance for other people to attack them too. It's like you only get one shot at this. If you can either take 6 from me, or you can see what the other people have in store for you and deal with that. Like, it's kind of a gamble, right?
The other place I have seen Maze of Ith, or you talked about at least, I've never seen it in person, but it's actually a combo piece. If you play cards like Krosan Restore, where if you have Threshold, you can tap it to untap 3 target lands, and you attack with it, you can Maze of Ith your own creature to untap it and then tap it, because we can still do that, and untap Maze of Ith and 2 other lands and make infinite mana during combat. And then you obviously need some kind of instant speed way. Maybe a Keswick Wolf Run would be pretty sweet, because then you can activate it infinite times on different creatures to like pay that off. But I always thought that was kind of cool, but like not very practical. I don't know. I guess I won't tell you it's wrong to play Maze of Ith as a spell, as your 30 whatever land, as an extra land. Obviously, this also does get offset by Urborg, Yavimaya some percentage of the time. I don't know. I feel like Thematic Compass fixes some of the problems that Mazevith has for me, but it's also slightly more vulnerable as an artifact for a little bit.
I think the combo is really cool. I think you should keep that if that's your win con, because I think that's very, very cool. But
yeah, don't cut the combo.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. But I think that if you're in Voltron heavy pods, maybe you should keep it. But I think in the average deck, I would not play it, though it can go in any average deck.
Maybe it's a more specialized card than it looks like, because it looks like it can go anywhere. But maybe it's more like know your group, know what your deck can't handle. Also, if you're one of those decks that can dunk on big creatures for all eternity, maybe you don't need it.
I mean, colorless cards, can go everywhere, but that doesn't mean you should be putting Vidalcan or a Mazevith and whatever and Temple of the False God into every deck just because it can go there. I mean, at that point, we talk about Commander being, 99 cards in your Commander, but at that point, it's like 96 cards, and then these three, right?
Yeah. I think also some cards that make Mazevith less appealing for me is like Soul Shatter, Flare of Malice, and these cards that just take out the biggest thing from each person just because that's what they do. Playing cards like that means I don't really need to deter anything. I'm just going to answer everyone's threats. I love those cards.
I run a lot of removal too, so I guess I'm not that worried about that. But the next card is Strict Serenade. This came out in MH3 and has been widely debated. Blue for an instant, counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 bird with flying, and this is one of the best rates you can get for a counter spell. It's only blue.
It's very efficient. Definitely a very efficient card. When you cast this card, you're getting a good deal. It doesn't matter what's happening. If they're casting a 1-drop that's going to kill you, great. I don't care. We're even on mana, and I stopped you from winning. If they're casting an 8-drop, if they're trying to fire off a Craterhoof Behemoth, or they're trying to fire off like Nicol Bolas Godpharaoh, of course, it's just a complete blowout, huge tempo gain for you. But the cons of this card, I think, are very real, and it makes me question, is this a real counterspell, or is this closer to rapid hybridization? Because this is not as versatile as most counterspells. Notably, this cannot counter any counterspell, which I think is like one of the number one things I think of. You think of like a counter war, or they say no and you say no right back. That's kind of huge. I don't know. We all know Swan Song is a fantastic card, but that can hit instants and sorceries. And I don't know about this one. It might not be worth playing.
I think it's really big. I think this is yet again a know that your group type deal, because I'm thinking about what I would counter with an artifact, creature, or planeswalker. I don't think there's really a planeswalker I would counter unless it came in with double the counters and they could ult immediately. Creatures, I think that's like Craterhoof. There's like a couple big creatures and stuff that maybe where it's like I win the game buttons immediately. And then artifact, maybe like a Bolas of Citadel if I was like 10 life or something like that, or a very low amount. But when I think about other things I want to counter, it's usually big sorceries. It's counters to my counter spell. It's things like that, and Strict Serenade doesn't hit any of those. But that's also the math that I was doing when I was trying to figure out whether I should play an offer you can't refuse. And non-creature spells, to me, are usually the most threatening things.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I disagree with you a little bit. I think there are plenty of creatures worth countering, but it's actually a fair point that most planeswalkers, not that scary, and most artifacts, I mean, on average, like 50% chance it's just going to be a mana rock. There's not a ton of scary artifacts, certainly not as many as I would say instants and sorceries, where they're like, I'm going to take your biggest threat off the board, or I'm going to wipe the board, or I'm going to win the game, or I'm going to get all of my blah, blah, blah back. And that stuff is usually the scariest and hardest to answer with other cards, because when I look at Strict Serenade, the thing I think is like, would I just pay an extra mana and just resculpt it? Like, I don't have to worry about timing. I can hit it whenever it's on the board. I don't have to hit it exactly when it comes down or never. I can just go, yeah, it resolves, and I'll get rid of it if I really need to. Resculpt feels to me maybe a little bit better. This looks more like a kill spell than a counter spell.
Yeah, enchantments are also very sticky, and this doesn't hit them. And because of that, I just don't think that. Yeah, I think the window of what I would be countering is narrow enough, because I don't really want to counter stuff unless I'm going to lose from it, or it's such a big tempo swing that I need to counter it, or else I will lose in like a few turns. And I feel like there are very few things that are within the artifact, creature, and planeswalker where I really need to counter it, and I can't wait for someone else to deal with it.
Yeah, definitely let me know where you stand on, like, do you think Strict Serenade is just another resculpt, or do you think it's a little bit better than that? Next up, cards I have been internally debating for a decade. These cards are seeing a lot of play, but I literally don't know what to do with them. First one, Red Elemental Blast. Red, for an instant, choose one. Counter target blue spell or destroy target blue permanent. Red Elemental, no. What's the other one? Pyroblast. They're like the same thing. One of them's slightly better. I'm sure the comments have already told me which one that is. It does not matter for this discussion.
Yes, and the next one is Veil of Summer. Green for an instant. Draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and your permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and black until end of turn. These are very cheap spells that can be fired off at instant speed, and this can be a blowout if things are, no one's expecting the red deck to have a counterspell. No one's expecting for all of your stuff to just get hexproof, or at least they are to some extent, but just being able to have that so cheaply at instant speed can be a very big surprise and can help you get the edge to win the game.
These cards, and there are a few other ones, I don't want to list all of them, but they're like these color-specific hosers that are fantastic if you can cast them. And it's that if that always has me hesitate to play them, but I could easily be wrong in excluding them. I want to know from you guys, how often Red Elemental Blast is dead? How often is Veil of Summer? That one's a really one I have questions about, because I think it's sort of understood that Red Elemental Blast is pretty good in like higher power stuff because everyone's playing blue, but I don't know where that falls in like a casual sense. These can be dead in your hand easily. If your opponents are playing white and red and green, if you're Veil of Summer, or if they're playing cards that don't target, like Soul Shatter, it can be tricky. And I don't know, but Veil of Summer also cycles. And there's other cards we look at, like Exotic Orchard. I expect that card to be almost a rainbow land. And if I can expect Exotic Orchard to be almost a rainbow land, shouldn't I also be able to expect my opponents to be playing either black or blue? It's a lot. There's a lot of layers.
I think there's a lot of math to deal with this. I feel like this has to be two different discussions for me. Red Elemental is something completely different than Veil of Summer. Red Ele, I only play in CEDH. I think that is so hyper specific, and to the point where I'm playing with Beezy enough in CEDH who doesn't run blue. It is tough to even keep that sometimes because sometimes the other people are running fringe decks that also aren't running blue, so it's a dead card.
I mean, yeah, some decks have very light blue, or a lot of their blue cards are just counter spells.
So I could only imagine playing it in like casual EDH where I probably couldn't cast it, or like the best thing to destroy might not even be that good. Veil of Summer I think is a little different because it cycles. I think that it feels bad to hold it up at times, but 1 mana cycle isn't the worst, and so I would rather play Veil of Summer. But with Red Elemental, I would always, or almost always, at least in casual, be playing Tybalt's Trickery over that because it's a more unconditional counterspell.
Yeah, there's other stuff at play too, because Red Elemental Blast only hits one color, but Veil of Summer hits 2 different colors. So the odds of playing against either of those are much higher than playing against just blue and having. That's the other thing too, is just because you can target something with Red Elemental Blast does not mean that justifies playing Red Elemental Blast. Like, oh, I blew up your Fairy Mastermind. It's like, okay, that's pretty good, but like, is that a card that always needs to hit removal? You know what I mean? Like, blow up Ristic Studies, counter Force of Wills, counter the big stuff, but like, just because you hit something and you got to get this card out of your hand doesn't necessarily mean you should be playing it. It could be great for you guys. I still want to know. That's why I personally lean away from it. But Veil of Summer, I'm starting to think that maybe I need to try it more. I don't really like Heroic Intervention, but maybe I'd like this card. I don't know.
I played Veil of Summer in a couple of my higher power green decks, and most of the time I do end up cycling it, but even if it's a cycle most of the time, it's better than being a dead card in your hand, right?
Yeah, and if you're a deck that can take huge turns and you're worried about counter spells, just playing this at sorcery speed to not draw a card still says spells you control can't be countered this turn by anything. So even if they have Tybalt's Trickery or Red Elemental Blast, it's not going to work.
I have this in Selvala, and it's been good there. Just you cannot do anything that hurts me this turn. But also, yeah, I think the cycling is what's the most important. I think if Red Ellie had cycling whatever stapled onto it, I might play it.
It's hard to knock a card that says, hey, most of the time you can just get rid of this to draw a card. That's the other argument about Red Elemental Blast and other these color hosers people play, is I can just discard it. That to me has never been the most appealing argument, because I can just discard anything. I mean, if the downside of any card is mitigated by me saying I can just Faithless Looting it, aren't all cards just like equally playable? I don't know. That feels a little weird.
Yeah, I feel like if you can't get it back immediately, or you can't like kind of play immediately with some sort of like madness type deal, I feel like it's not really, that's not a great argument for it, because it's like, okay, well then why don't you build a deck with only 7 drops? They're all the same when you can discard them, right?
And this maybe brings into question other color haters that I'm not playing. Like, what about Compost? It's 1 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you draw a card. This is sort of like a mixture between Red Elemental Blast and Veil of Summer, where like the effect is completely out of this world, so busted, but it's then restricted to 1 color. And this maybe is a preference thing, but I want to know, like, geez, Compost is either the most busted card in the world that is like better than Rhystic Study, or it's like, ooh, okay, sure do have this in my hand. And maybe this is a card that you play in like enchantment decks where you can still get a trigger out of it. It still counts for things like Ethereal Armor. Maybe it's an auto include. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean, I think that it's a little bit rough, because when I think of black decks putting stuff into the graveyard, it's not always cards, right? It's a lot of like tokens and stuff. So I feel like even if you're playing against a black deck that cares about the graveyard, you still might not be getting a ton of cards off this, even if you play it turn 2.
I think maybe you probably are. If they mill, you still get cards. If
Yeah.
you stitch your supplier and hit 2 black cards, you draw 2 cards.
True, but I don't know. I feel like this is so risky, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm playing against a black deck that doesn't really care about the graveyard. What now? Guess this is...
I've never met him.
Well, I'm just saying, I think that there is an option, and so I don't really... I wouldn't be playing this unless I was, like, sideboarding, per se, or if I knew I was going up against something in
Like a
particular.
meta call.
Yeah, I think that would be my only way to play this for the most part.
I think if I want answers so bad, I got to get out there and do some research. I maybe should put Compost into my Enchantress deck and just note my experiences with it. You know, I want to get like 10 games with it in, and then maybe I'll come back to you with a YouTube short or something and figure that out. Next up is our boy. Who is it?
This is Burnish Heart, 3 mana for a 2/2, who's an artifact and a creature, because sometimes that's relevant. 3 mana, sack it, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. This can be put into any deck because it's colorless. It can count as an artifact and a creature if you care about that, with like Delirium with the new Winter, for instance. And it can get basics in any combination, whether you have a, need 2 mountains or a mountain or plains or whatever. But it is 6 mana to find 2 basic lands, and the lands come in tapped, so it's not like it gets refunded immediately, like with Skyshroud Claim finding 2 untapped forests.
You know what this kind of reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of Feed the Swarm, where like, are you a player who has to have land ramp in your deck that can't do that? Is it like a security thing? Because this, you're like way overpaying for this, because even Explosive Vegetation is like below rate a little bit. 4 mana for 2 lands is okay, but like 4 mana for 2 basics that enter tap, which is kind of what this is, not a card anyone's playing without a bunch of extra frills or cycling or synergies stapled onto it. I just feel like as Commander keeps going and as they print more sets like Zendikar Rising, Modern Horizons 3, all this type of stuff, 6 mana to find 2 lands just gets worse and worse, and it feels like Burnished Heart has always kind of been at this power level, but how many cards are stacked now on top of it, where it feels like you're just in like a tempo black hole sometimes when you play this?
I'm not playing Burnished Heart in anything. Just, I think that 6 mana is a ton to pay for that. And the fact that they come in tap too is what really I think would like shoot me in the foot, because I need to take basically 2 earlier turns off to make sure I get 2 lands. I like having answers for everything, but I'd still rather have artifact ramp in my decks that can't have green ramp than have this and have like this security of knowing that it will happen.
Yeah, I haven't found this card very compelling or like appealing for anything like Delirium, even though it is an artifact creature. I feel like it's still one of the cards I cut from all those precons that have it for that reason. I just think, Burnished Heart, buddy, I used to love you. What happened? You've changed. Or maybe I have changed.
I think you've changed. I think the game has changed in general. I never really was high on Burnished Heart. I've always thought 6 mana was a lot. I used to be higher on Explosive Veggie, but I even thought 4 mana was a lot.
Oh, we're so spoiled.
I am so spoiled. So I started playing Commander in 2017.
Yeah, Burnished Heart, it's not you, it's me. Sorry, buddy. Let us know if you're still any Burnished Heart stands out there. I do have it in a couple decks. I have like a mono blue deck where I want to get as many islands into play as possible. Definitely seems good there.
I think so, but I think that if you're not caring about the artifact creature typing, or if you don't care, if you need something like BZ said in specific, I don't think you should be playing it for the most part.
Poor little buddy. All right, give us the next one.
The next one is Helm of the Host, 4 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that is a copy of equipped creature, except it's not legendary and it has haste, but you have to equip it for 5 mana. This can combo very, very easily. This can get multiple of your commander or a big legendary that is incredibly impactful, and you can get gigantic effects, especially if you can take extra combats. But it has a very high equip cost. I mean, 5 mana is a lot. It has a high cast cost at 4 mana, so bare minimum you need 9 mana if you cast it on its face, and you have to wait till combat, so you do have a window of time where people can do stuff and mess with it.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is big stuff, and I'm not saying you should take this card out of decks where combo. Maybe we should just separate that. Like, that's definitely a pro of the card. If you're Godoing or Aureliaing, how am I going to tell you to cut this card? That's one of your main win cons. Don't do that. But, like, if you're not, I don't know. I feel like everyone else sees this as such a fun card, but every time I've tried to play it, it's almost been the opposite for me, where, like, it's only fun in theory. I certainly love the idea of doing this, but it's never fun for me to spend 9 mana and get nothing, and that's what I feel like happens a lot of the time, especially if you have to play Helm of the Host and then you can't equip it immediately because it's, you know, not turn 9. When you pass, everybody knows what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that it is... Every time I've tried to play it, it is so telegraphed, and there's, you know, the interaction of, oh, I can just kill the creature when you go to equip. Okay, well, I guess the only thing I have left is something kind of subpar that I don't want copied. That's super cool. I think that if you are playing a deck that can equip things for free, this can be incredibly powerful, but it's very deck specific. If you don't have things that can equip for 0 or things that attach, you know, when it comes in immediately, I think it's not that great to have this at the rate that it has.
Yeah, if you're throwing around Pure Steel Paladins and you can, and then your now investment in this card is much less, it's less than half, and they kill the creature, you're like, I actually don't care, I'll move it over. Or if you kill the Helm of the Host, I mean, I spent 4 mana and I played Pure Steel, so I drew a card. Like, those decks, I mean, maybe you do want it. I'm not sure how much competition there is in the equipment slot. Probably a lot, but I'm not sure of how many equipments are on this level or better. I don't have that info right now. But yeah, I don't know. It looks fun. Even now it looks fun, and I'm like, ooh, what if I did this? But like, even when you do it the first time, you're not getting your mana's worth. You still have to do it a second time. I have played this card, you know, even to success where it never dies. And it is fun, I gotta say. It does feel fun. I think I played this with Tristani, Celestine's Voice, and so then I would get more Tristanis, which would all trigger the other Tristanis. It was fun, but I don't know if for me it's worth it to get blown out, at least what I feel like is most of the time. But that's a judgment for you to make.
Yeah, I think this has high highs and low lows, but I think 5 mana is not the price that I want to equip things with, and I think 4 mana to play something, and if it doesn't get equipped immediately, I think that is an incredible investment for little to no payoff immediately, at least.
The best Helm of the Host format, and this is not up for debate, was Dominaria Limited, because that format was so slow and grindy that you could put Helm of the Host on a Saproling token and you would win the game.
Really?
Yeah, I love that format.
Oh my god, yeah. I think that if your games are going that slow, you should be playing this card.
Moxfield.com. I told you you'd hear from them later, and it's now later. This is the best place to build a deck online. We're not even kidding. It's not even close. They are a sponsor of the video. You couldn't have guessed that the video sponsor is right now, but Moxfield is the greatest place to be. If you see a card that's controversial and you want to comment about it, you can let someone know, respectfully, because Moxfield has a way to comment, like, and share decks. Moxfield.com. Next up, another newish card, Stroke of Midnight, 2 and a white instant. Destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white human creature token. Where did we settle on this? I never asked anyone what was the final verdict on this card? Is it better than Generous Gift? Is it worse than Generous Gift? It certainly has pros over it. If you are not destroying a land the vast majority of the time, I would obviously just rather give them a 1/1 than a 3/3.
Instant speed removal is very important, but because this is just high costed at 3 mana, I think that this can go either way. It's unconditional for the most part if you don't want to be destroying lands, but I think that there are a lot of problematic lands that can be running around that you might want the flexibility for. We have heard that the command zone does not like this or Generous Gift. So there is room for debate to not like either of them.
Yeah, that's the other thing is, like, even if you don't like Stroke of Midnight over Generous Gift, some people also don't like Generous Gift. And they're running around, they say they don't want to play 3-mana removal sometimes is the thing. Even if it is very versatile, it's not very efficient because paying 3 mana for one removal spell is like pretty much the most I want to pay for a single target thing. You know, we're pushing it. I bet in 2 years I'm going to be on here telling you that I don't like Generous Gift. But I think for now, I still err on the side of playing it. But I do see what people are saying. And I like questioning, you know, my own beliefs of like, hey, maybe Generous Gift is not like the have to play, must build around staple, you know, that people think it is.
I don't think I play Generous Gift in anything. I think that I might have played it in one deck when I first started coming on the channel, and I don't think I play it in anything now. It has been outclassed for me by so many things that hit multiple things, or just cheaper in general. If I want to destroy a land, I'm usually running a ton of colors, so maybe that plays into it a little bit, but there's like land, you know, single target land destruction stapled onto lands now, whether, you know, and you don't have to play strip mine anymore. There are things to destroy all types of just permanents, and I don't want to be playing 3 mana. I don't like this card, and I don't like Generous Gift.
Wow. Okay, but do you play Chaos Warp or Beast Within?
I play Chaos Warp in things that can't destroy enchantments.
So for the Feed the Swarm reason.
Yeah. So I'm playing it in like Rakdos and that sort of thing, and I'm playing Beast Within in only mono green decks.
I
think I only play it in Selvala.
Because at that point, green has a really hard time answering creatures. So I think, yeah, Beast Within counters transformation. But then I think when you move over to white doesn't have a hard time answering anything. So maybe paying 3 mana for it is not something white needs to do. The other thing that I think maybe Command Zone or other people mentioned was they just want to exile. They want like Excise the Imperfect. And so they're willing to pay 3 mana, but for that price, they want Anguish Unmaking, or they want to be able to exile the thing. That's also interesting. I don't know if I have needed my cards to say exile all that often, but maybe I'm not paying attention.
There is so much recursion in Commander nowadays. You see it on like Dog Meat, you see it on Yuma, you see it, and there's just Naya recursion. It's not just black anymore. And so I think that having exile is so much more important than it was 3 years ago. And because of that, I think if you're paying 3 mana, you need exile stapled onto your stuff, unless you actually can't do that within your colors.
Right. All right, next up, a card that I have gone on an emotional roller coaster with is Tempt with Discovery. 3 green for his sorcery. Search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Sweet. Each opponent may do the same thing. And for each opponent who searches the library this way, you get to do the thing again and go find any land and put it onto the battlefield. If it enters untapped normally, it does with this card too. And then everybody shuffles their library. So in theory, this can get 4 of your 4 best lands in play right now at the same time for 4 mana. That's ridiculous rate. You do have to give away the 3 best lands of your opponents in exchange for that. But sometimes that works out. But it really depends on who you're playing with, because we tend to play with mostly not the same people. We go to conventions at least once a month, and we're playing like 15 games in a weekend with total strangers who we don't play with ever again, right? In a lot of cases. So our decks need to kind of be built for anything, ready for everything. And a lot of people, what they were saying is they have not been having good success with Tempt with Discovery because it's so easy to play around.
Yeah, 4 mana for find your best land only is a bad rate. Obviously, giving your opponents choices is never good. And I think my friends kind of scared me into this because we were like just chatting about Tempt with Discovery, and they're like, okay, you can play Tempt with Discovery, we'll all find Strip Mine, and you get your 4th best land for 4 mana. And I'm like, that's awful, but I hate giving my opponents choices. I am very down on this card. I feel like one of the first discussions we actually had when I first met you about cards. You have played this in Belladros, and you played with all of my friends, and we went, no, we're not going to take that. And you're like, I guess I'll go get Field of the Dead for 4 mana.
Which I guess it's still kind of worth it, but I think what turned me away from this card, I don't play this anymore, is that I really want Field of the Dead in play. If you know me, that's kind of my thing. I really want that card in play in certain decks. And I don't need everybody to get Strip Mine. That's probably mostly a meme. But what I really don't want is for anyone to get one land destruction thing and mess me up. Because I'm going to get Field of the Dead, sure. But the next couple lands, maybe nick those, or maybe like a hideaway land or something for value. They're not as important as the first one. And I really don't want it to be destroyed and have to go through all these hoops to try to get it back. So I think I'd rather just play land tutors now, there are a couple more. There's like Sowing Mycospawn. I think that's way better than this now because I'd rather just pay 4 mana, get the thing, get a little something extra, and move on with my life and not have to worry about, are they playing Demolition Field? Are they playing Strip Mine? Are they just going to, say no and I get a 4 mana tutor with no frills when I could get one with frills?
I prefer Pier's Whim over this because Pier's Whim kind of lets me be in control. I don't like giving my opponents choices. So if I want to be political, I go, okay, you can have a land, but like in exchange, whatever later. And for you to, destroy this, I'll go get a land. So bare minimum, I'm always getting my land for the 4 mana, but I get extra control, and I'd rather have that than just 4 mana at its face, go get my best land, and then maybe my opponents destroy it. Like that wouldn't be that cool.
Yeah, giving them the opportunity to remove your threat, all contained in the spell that's resolving, and maybe not one I'm a fan of. If you frequently are a player who gets to fire off the 4 tutors with each opponent also tutoring but not getting removal, I want to know how often that happens. I would definitely be curious. Like, I want to know, are you playing with the same play group and you guys are all just like suckers for value, or like some people just can't say no, and that's not like anything against them, because sometimes I go, yeah, I need to go find that thing.
I feel like the first player always decides. As soon as one person says, yeah, I'm getting it, everyone always goes, well, I'm going to get it. Why wouldn't I get it? I mean, they're getting it, and then it's like, you just got to trick one person. You don't have to trick everyone. You just need to trick one person into taking it.
Could be worth it.
But if you have one person who likes value, I'm sure that your entire play group will just like value at that point.
Sweet talk the person to your left. Forget about the other two. All right, got to go to the next one here. It is Phyrexian Arena. 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw 1 card and you lose 1 life.
We've all agreed that paying 1 life for 1 card is usually a pretty good rate, and we've agreed on that. Paying once and guaranteed card draw while this sticks around is pretty good, especially since it's only 3 mana. That's not a big investment. But the con is that it's a do nothing until your upkeep. You're not getting those cards immediately, and it can be potentially 3 mana for no cards if it gets swept up in something. It's very slow, and it's just drawing an extra one, and it's just like a slow tick of cards. We have talked about not liking this card because it's been outclassed by things like Call of the Ring that was introduced in Lord of the Rings, or just card draw because, I don't know, maybe we're just greedy little goblins and we like our card draw immediately. But I don't play this in anything, despite having really cool art with the Jason Frasca thing. I think that's a very cool option of the card.
Yeah, this is a card that's split people for a while. I think maybe Nitpicking Nerds recruited a few people to the Phyrexian Arena is not great side, but I like how you've summarized it. Trading 1 life for 1 card is good, and setting down an enchantment and having it giving me recurable value is good. But what I have an issue with is just the time frame at which I'm getting my rewards for that. I think that's a little slow. Black Market Connections, I think, is also a card that hurt the playability of Phyrexian Arena. I think a lot of people left Phyrexian Arena and went more towards Black Market. I know you have thoughts about Black Market. Might as well throw them in here.
I don't love Black Market. I feel like on its face, it's just it's like make a shapeshifter for what, like 2 life or something?
3 life for 3/2, 2 life
for a card?
And
or
1 life
treasure?
for a treasure.
Yeah. Bare minimum, I have to pick one of those. And it's 1 life for a treasure is not something I want to do. But 2 life for a card adds up really quickly. And I usually don't want the shapeshifter, so it's just... the versatility is nice, but 2 mana for card seems bad because
2 life.
Or 2 life. 2 life for a card seems bad because I don't want the shapeshifter, because 3 life for a body, unless I'm getting ETBs of a certain creature type, I still don't even know if I'd play it in that.
I like that it's there. I wouldn't want to play the card. If you just cut that off, it's the worst card. So, 5% of the time you'll do it, maybe, if you're a life gain deck. Definitely another interesting one. It still basically triggers at the same rate as Phyrexian Arena, but you get a little bit more, but you pay a little bit more. Black Market Connection's also not a card I've really gone to. I have not ever played it in the deck now, and I have seen it, and it's looked okay. I guess I haven't really been across from Black Market and been like, I wish I had that card.
I've been burned too many times in the limited. It hurt me. It's killed me. So multiple times. So and maybe that carries over to Commander just a little bit, but it's not the rate that I want to be. I want to be my goblin self, and I want to draw cards immediately. Or, I don't want to wait till upkeep. That's why we love the heuristics dice. It's any time an opponent does something. But this is just at the beginning of your upkeep, no matter which one we're talking about at this point. That's a long time to wait, and it's not immediate, and I don't want that in my cards.
I want the Phyrexian Arena stands. If you're standing any of these cards, actually, if you have any opinion on any of these cards, sound off in the comments. Maybe give us like a full breakdown of what side of the camp you fall on for every card. We'll go through and read them. We'll heart them all. If you want to watch more Nitpicking Nerds content, we just talked about the strongest commanders in Duskmourn. If you want to be prepared for that set and know what you're going to be playing against the most, this is your best resource.